Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'll give you an overview of the final rules for the remote identification of unmanned aerial vehicles, which was just published yesterday by the FAA. Now, it's been less than 24 hours, and the document is 470 pages long. So the minute they published it, I wanted to start reading it because I need to understand what these new rules mean for me as a flyer, and I'm sure you're interested as well. So the minute they put it up on the web, I brewed a really strong pot of coffee, I sat down at my desk, and I started reading through it. Now, it's a complicated document because it's got a lot of legalese in there, a lot of minutia, a lot of regulatory language. There are references to other sections of other documents, so it took me a little while to parse through it, and I didn't want to sit here and just bore you for an hour and go through all the minutia of what was in that document. So what I thought I'd do is really quickly put a clip together that explains the nuts and bolts of exactly what the new rules mean, and I'll follow up with other clips where I go in a little bit more nuance of some of the rules, but I wanted to get this out there quickly because we've gotten a ton of emails and phone calls already from viewers of the channel asking us, what does this mean? Is it the end of the hobby? Do I have to get rid of my drones? What does it mean for registration? So there's a ton of questions out there, and I wanted to put this out quickly to sort of simplify the situation for you. So before I get into what's changed, and a lot of it is good, so it's not all bad, it's not all draconian, but there's some things in there that are still troubling, and I'll get into that in a bit. But before I get into any of that, I do want to point out that I understand completely that this is a huge political issue for a lot of flyers out there. There are people on both sides of the fence. There's people on this side that are civil libertarians that are saying it's a violation of my civil liberties for people to be tracking me or regulating the way I fly my drone. On the other side, there's the commercial people that are saying hobbyists shouldn't be in the air anyway. We should reserve that airspace for deliveries of packages and other things. And I'm in the middle on this. I feel like if we're participating in an organized society and we're a civil society, there has to be some regulatory involvement on things that affect other people. And I know that's stretching it for a lot of people, but if you're doing something that may impact me, I kind of think there should be some rules that we all agree on to behave by. And drones are no different. I mean, initially when we all started flying drones going way back, there weren't a lot of rules, but the drone couldn't fly very far. In some cases, it was tethered to you with a string, so you didn't have a lot of concern about it disappearing over the horizon and causing problems. With the latest generations of drones, you can fly some of these 7 or 8 miles, and that can be scary because the operator is remote, way remote from where the drone is. And to be fair, again, in society, there's a lot of yahoos out there that just buy a drone, put it up, and want to do crazy things with it, which, as a responsible drone flyer, which I know most of you are, or all of you are, you don't want that guy doing that, because if he does that, then the focus is on everybody else that's flying legally, and all of a sudden laws start coming into place. So I feel like initially when they came out with the proposal last year, which by the way, on New Year's Eve, come on there. But anyway, when they came out with that proposal, I read through it, and there were a lot of things in there that scared me. A lot of things that I felt like were really overreach. Now, I recommend it, and a lot of you followed that recommendation, and I know a lot of their channels said it as well, that you need to sit down, put together your thoughts on paper and submit those, because they always ask for suggestions. The way this rulemaking works is they put out a proposal, they solicit opinions from the public, they read through those opinions, and they take those into consideration before the final rule is actually put into place. And I know I took a lot of heat for saying, please sit down, put your thoughts on paper, and tell them what you like, what you don't like, what you think should be changed, offer suggestions, and they'll listen to you. And a lot of people said, oh, Rick, they're a government agency, they're not going to listen to you, just don't waste your time doing that. But the honest truth is, in this document, part of it, probably a third of it, is their response to public comments. So they not only read the comments, but they actually illustrate those comments in this final rule and add commentary of why they took some into consideration, why they changed some major provisions of what the proposal had, and you really did have an impact. So good on you guys. And I think in a democratic society, I'm not saying Republican Democrat, I'm saying in a society where we all agree on things, that's a democratic society, it's important to have input because, again, as an engineer, I can tell you that any process that doesn't have some feedback loop will shake itself apart over time. So the feedback's important, and obviously it worked because the proposal that came out last year had some pretty scary things in it. Initially, they were proposing that drones had to remotely identify by broadcasting from the drone, as well as having an internet connection that was persistent, that was uploading telemetry information, flying information, and that was troubling to me because the cost of that and the subscription service and where's my data going. It also bothered me in the initial proposal that that was going to be kept for a period of time where people could review it, who's reviewing it, who gets the right to review it. So all that stuff bothered me a lot. They changed that. That's gone. So in the new proposal, that's gone. So I'll get into those in a bit. The other thing I wanted to say is that Elaine Chao, who's the head of the FAA at this point, has an impossible job. And again, I'm getting a little political here, but maybe a little commentary here. But I wouldn't want that job for all the money in the world because you have to remember she's in the middle of all the protective agencies that are out there, all the people that protect us and keep us safe, Homeland Security, federal agencies, FBI, CIA, all the people that are awake at night worrying about bad things happening, and these drones sort of being a mechanism to have those bad things happening. So they're banging on our door saying, you got to shut this down. People can do bad things with drones. Then there's the other side of it, the hobbyists that are saying to her, hey, we want to fly our drones. We're good guys. Don't put a lot of draconian regulations in place. So she's sitting in the middle of that, and she has to make sense of preventing those bad things from happening while still giving us the freedom to fly our drones. And I have to say, after reading through this, in some cases twice, different sections, I think they've really got this sort of beautiful compromise between the two. I think they've done a great job of balancing both sides of the equation with the option to change things down the road. But make no mistake, this final rule is the law of the land, and it's going to be the law of the land for quite some time. Now, again, it doesn't take effect right away. 60 days after it's been published in the register, it goes into effect. But then the grandfathering period is the manufacturers have 18 months to modify their equipment to comply with the rule. We as Fliers have an additional year beyond that to actually be flying equipment that's compliant. So we've got plenty of time, and I know people out there are saying, what about the drones I own today? I own a lot of drones. There are provisions in there to allow you to continue to fly the drones that you own today, and I'll get into that in a second. So overall, it's a good proposal. I think it's a great compromise. We'd be naive to think that remote ID was not going to come about. There has to be some way to register something like this that impacts the public out there. And I think this proposal, the final rules proposal, is a pretty fair compromise with a couple of exceptions. Now, I'm going to have to read a lot of this because there's a lot of minutia in there, and I want to make sure I get it right. So excuse my grandfather glasses here. All right, so for starters, make no mistake that all persons operating unmanned aircraft, registered or required to be registered, must follow the remote identification operating requirements unless the operation meets one of the 3 exemption criteria. I'm not going to go through the exemption criteria because those are things that you're never going to get an exception for unless you're flying commercially. So hobbyists are going to have to register. Now, the caveat there is if you're under 250 grams, you don't have to register your drone. So if you're flying something small and light, don't worry about the registration. Don't worry about the remote ID. If you're over 250, like some of the larger drones, pretty much all the drones on the market, you have to register your drone and you have to enable remote ID. Now, there are 3 types of remote ID, and this is where it gets interesting. So the standard remote identification of unmanned aircraft, which I think will be everything because the manufacturers won't be able to sell drones that are over 250 grams that don't have a remote ID mechanism built into it after that period expires. So after the 18 months expire, you can't buy it. They can't manufacture and sell a drone in the US that doesn't have some type of remote ID built into the drone. And I think that's a good thing. But the stuff you already own, the stuff you buy between now and then, you can fix. And I'll tell you that in a second. But anyway, what a drone's going to have to broadcast are a couple of things. A unique identifier that establishes the identity of the unmanned aircraft. So that'll probably be the serial number of the drone. They're also talking about a session ID, which is something that may come about later on. But for now, it's going to be the serial number of the drone that's going to be broadcast. So authorities will know immediately, I got the serial number of the drone. They can trace that back to some Yahoo doing something dumb, and they know who's flying that dumb drone. An indication of the unmanned aircraft's latitude, longitude, geometric altitude, and velocity. So they're going to basically want to know where it's sitting in 3D space, where it's heading, and how fast it's moving. I don't think that's unreasonable. An indication of the control station, latitude, longitude, and geometric altitude. So they're not only going to know where the drone is in the 3D space, they're going to know where you're standing in a 3D space. Again, I'm not having a problem with that because I'm playing by the rules. A time mark, so it's going to want to know where it is, when it is, and then an emergency status indicator. So from whatever they're receiving this remote ID on, they're going to know immediately if your battery's got a problem or if it's flying with GPS issues. Anything that would cause a problem with the drone will be reported as part of that remote ID stream. That's the most common way for you to fly a drone. So again, in 18 months, manufacturers are going to have to start building. If it's DJI, maybe it's their Mavic 4 at that point. It's going to have a remote ID transmitter in it. But the good news is, there's no longer a requirement to have it be broadcast from the drone and through the network at the same time. So only broadcast through the drone. And the best part is there's no exotic technology needed. These use Wi-Fi. All of them use Wi-Fi. Now DJI's got OcuSync and a couple other technologies that ride on top of that, but it's basically a Wi-Fi broadcast transmission. So I don't think it's that big a stretch for DJI to incorporate that in new drones, or any manufacturer, really. I shouldn't be picking on them. Any manufacturer that broadcasts over the unregulated bands of Wi-Fi can build that into the mechanism that actually broadcasts, and you're done. That's it. There's no extra $100, extra $200. There's no exotic ADS broadcast technology, ADS-B. It's simple stuff. So, and again, I'll give you a hint. If you're flying DJI products today, if you're flying DJI Go 4 or the new Fly app, you can actually go in there and you've got a remote ID section where you can put your name in it and it'll broadcast your name and your position. So, and actually DJI last year did a drone to phone demonstration where they actually showed on a cell phone how you can pick up that information. So they're kind of ready to go already. All right, so that's the first case. And again, that's the standard drone. Anything built after 18 months from now will have that capability. The second is a remote identification broadcast modules. And this is something that I argued for strongly because I was worried that if you bought a drone now and you're flying one of these, what happens in 18 months? Well, I can't fly my drone anymore? Well, that's not fair. And I can't retrofit the drone by taking it apart and soldering stuff inside of it. So what that second requirement allows you to do is to buy a remote ID module, which isn't on the market yet. And I promise you, once they start releasing them, we'll be testing them here on the channel and doing comparisons. But essentially, it's going to be something small that attaches to your drone that's completely independent of the drone, probably charged through, an internal battery. When you start up the drone, you start up that remote beacon. It's got a serial number, which is registered on the FAA site. You're flying your drone. It's doing the broadcasting of your altitude, your position, and all the rest of it. The big difference between number one and number two is number one, they're going to know exactly where the control station is. With number two, it's going to broadcast the serial number, indication of longitude, latitude, geometric altitude, and velocity. So all the stuff you had to do in situation one, an indication of latitude, longitude, and geometric altitude of the takeoff location. So the difference between a drone with an incorporated and a drone that has a beacon on it, and this is a small point, but it's important, is that the beacon will only report where it took off. If you run to another location after you've taken off and people come looking for you, they're going to come looking for you at the spot where you took off. So I don't know if it matters to you or not, but that's an interesting distinction between the two. All right, the third one is anything that isn't going to use remote ID can only be flown at, I'll read it here, a person operating an unmanned aircraft without remote identification must always operate within visual line of sight. So again, visual line of sight, which is kind of an interesting clue because all of us are operating under visual line of sight at this point, so maybe that's going to change. All right, visual line of sight within an FAA recognized identification area. Now, up until now, and this is a good thing about the new regulations, up until now, that used to be sort of club sites. So if you were an AMA member and they had a club site, you could fly there. They've greatly expanded the people that can apply for that kind of exemption. So they're allowing schools and universities and research centers. So I could see this being a community thing where maybe you go down to your local high school and fly, and you're flying all over the high school or the middle school or something like that. Or maybe your church decides to do it. I don't know. You got a club, you set it up there. So it gives you a lot more ways to fly units without remote ID that you're going to keep within visual line of sight for you. But I think those three are pretty reasonable. And again, most of us are going to fall under category one, where the drone itself is going to have an internal remote ID beacon that's being generated, and it's going to give all the information we need to stay in compliance with the rules. Now, the only other things that, again, are small points here is that there was a big debate about when it starts broadcasting and when it stops broadcasting. Now, remember, the reason they're doing this is because, heaven forbid, you're at a football game and this big scary black drone starts flying over the football game, right? Everybody's looking up. Why is that up there? Is that a terrorist attack? Well, what's going on up there? So the people that are in charge of protecting that venue need to know, what's that drone doing? And by the way, where's the guy standing who's flying that drone? I always use the guy because guys do bad stuff. So where's the bad guy standing? Well, if they only monitor where it took off and where it landed, that doesn't give them a lot of time. Now, they changed the rules to say it's only going to be monitoring, the RID has to be broadcast once you take off, not once you spin up the drone, but when you take off, but it's going to continue monitoring even after landing until you turn the drone off. And I think that makes sense because if you're doing bad stuff and you want to recover the drone, you're going to land it. It's going to take you a couple of minutes to get to it, turn it off, and run away with it. That gives the authorities a little more time to catch up with you, that's all. And again, as a guy who plays by the rules, I want the bad guys out of this hobby. I'm sure you want the bad guys out of this hobby too, because every time I see somebody doing something incredibly dumb with a drone on a YouTube video, I go on their channel and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Play by the rules. You're hurting all of us because we all want to fly. We're loving this hobby and you're messing it up for all of us. So stop doing dumb stuff. So this kind of makes sure that those people don't do dumb things. It also, because another provision that I'm not a fan of, but I'll talk about in a minute, because all of us can pick up that information, it makes you a better pilot. Knowing that everybody around you not only knows what you're doing that's dumb, but where you're standing as a dummy, right? So it kind of self-governs a little bit. So I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. All right, a couple more things really quickly. A couple of things in the rules that are still troubling to me, and that's the one I was just talking about now, is, and this is a quote from the actual regulation, the broadcast will permit detection of unmanned aircraft and will permit law enforcement and the general public that receives the broadcasted message elements to have information about the unmanned aircraft location, as well as information about the control station or takeoff location. Now, initially, I had a real problem with that because I'm envisioning me flying my drone legally and somebody being very upset about seeing a drone that they don't know and recognize and come looking for me. But the honest truth is, by having that provision in there, it forces all of us to be better flyers. We're not going to do creepy things like hover over a backyard or fly over a party. We're going to be responsible flyers, knowing that anybody with a cell phone or a tablet or anything to pick up that Wi-Fi remote ID can know where we're standing. Just like if we were doing something dumb, like shooting off fireworks where we were supposed to do that around a lot of people, it's pretty easy to find who's doing that. So it's sort of a self-governing thing in some respects. But anyway, that's in the regulation. There was a lot of discussion in there. And I was one of the guys who said, don't do that. Don't put that in there because I'm afraid somebody's going to get upset, come looking for me, and an altercation is going to occur. Not that I'm going to fight them, but people get angry. But it's in there, so that's part of the rule. The last one is they're still talking about the network connection is evolving because there's this concept of a UTM, this unmanned traffic management systems that have to be incorporated down the road. So there may still be down the road a need to have that kind of network connectivity, but it isn't there now. And the good news is, this is going to be the rule for the next 3 years or so. So it's not like it's going to change overnight. And if it changes, I'm sure the manufacturers will figure it out. All right, a couple other final thoughts. The things that were dropped, this is really good. So they dropped the persistent network connection. That's going to save us money, headaches, and hassles of trying to make sure that we're connected to the Wi-Fi when we're out there in the field. So that's good. They also removed the requirement that you had to pay $5 for every drone that had remote ID beacons in it. Because initially they said, we want every drone to have a unique registration, $5, $5, $5. So it's going to cost you a fortune. They've dropped that. So now if you're a hobbyist flyer, you register once, you pay your $5. You can put all your drones on that same registration and all of your unique RIDs on those registrations as well. So it saves you a little bit of money there. The last one is, no, that was the last one. Okay. So final thoughts on this. It applies to both new UAVs and other UAVs that you've owned for a while. I think that's a positive. I think that they really had a struggle with how do we retrofit drones that are out there flying today, because there's hundreds of thousands of drones in people's possession. We've spent a fortune on buying this technology. Don't cripple that. So that broadcast beacon, I think, is a great compromise between the two, and that I think is a really good thing. They've expanded the areas that can handle it. I think that one of the concerns was that schools are not going to have the funding to go out there and apply for these things and maintain these things. So the fact that they broadened it to be schools and universities and research facilities and local clubs, I think is a really good thing, because there are going to be a lot of people flying these drones that are over the 250, that are inexpensive drones that maybe don't have the remote ID broadcast capabilities in them, that need a place to fly. And I think expanding the places you can fly with that type of drone is a good thing. And then, okay, I talked before about the standard ID versus the broadcast ID. So if you're using the standard ID, you're going to know where the person's standing, and if they're moving around with the controller, you can still find them. If you're using the broadcast module, you're only going to know where they took off and landed. And then the last one I'm going to say, and this is again a political conversation. It's more, I guess, more editorial here. This could have gone really, really wrong for us. And I said that when the first proposal came out. I was terribly worried that this could have meant the end of the hobby, because you have to remember there are powerful forces on the commercial side of this business representing all the big names out there that want to deliver packages remotely. And they've got money, they've got lobbyists, they've got the ear of Congress and senators, they're scaring people in Washington, and they really wanted the hobbyists, I think, out of that equation. They wanted clear skies and good sailing for all the commercial flights that are out there. So that original proposal scared me a lot, because there were a lot of things in there that I felt were overreach from the government, sort of making us, kind of forcing us out of the game financially. I think with this new proposal, most of those have been eliminated. So I'm not so much worried about it. And again, I'm recognizing the fact that remote ID is something we have to contend with. I think it's a responsible move. I take a lot of grief on the channel for saying that. I've said it ever since the first proposal came out. I feel like if I'm forced to register my boat, my gun, in some cases, my car, my dog, my license for marriage, I mean, registering a drone is not that big a deal. And now that we know what the final rules are, we understand exactly what the game is. And I think for me, I can absolutely fly as a hobbyist and a commercial flyer inside the boundaries of that game at this point. And I think the FAA is doing the best they can. And again, hats off to you, Elaine Chow, for putting this together. And I'm not sucking up to anybody. I feel like if I'm in that position, that's a Faustian bargain, man. How do I make a decision between commercial and hobbyist and keep everybody happy? You can't. So they're going to complain, the commercial guys. Hobbyists are going to complain. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flaming below about how I've laid down to my overlords in the Federal Aviation Administration. I haven't. I'm just a guy like you, flying a drone. that loves this hobby. And I was scared to death that that proposal would have put a lot of restrictions on what I could do. This new final rule, which again is the law of the skies, takes a lot of those handcuffs off. So I think it's a good thing. Anyway, that's it for today. I promise you, I've got a lot more clips coming that are shorter that go through different nuances here about flying at night or flying over people, because there are provisions in there for both of those, which I think are both positive, and I'll have clips coming out on those. But I do solicit your feedback, so drop your comments below, good and bad. Let me know what you're thinking. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that button over there, because we're giving away a lot of stuff over the next couple of weeks you're definitely going to want to get in on. We're starting up the home Drone Valley team thing, which a lot of people have been asking about, which is going to be really cool. So subscribe to the channel. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the support we're getting on the channel and the feedback and the comments and all the rest of that stuff. So thank you so much for all your support. And until next time, happy flying.